Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about Python and the future of web development. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, why is it that people say that full stack Python is the future of web development? Who are these people? I haven't talked to them because I have never heard anybody claim that Python is the future of web development. Python is the grandmaster these days of anything related to data science and machine learning, maybe that I can give it, but like not web. Holy shit, not web. I would say that as for when it comes to web development, if we just exclude, the obvious thing like PHP and association with web, WordPress, and these sorts of things, right? Because that is a pretty big area when it comes to web. I think it might be outdated now, but it was at last I heard like a third of all websites or something like that runs on WordPress. I'm not sure if they even moved over to Node.js. I haven't been in touch with the community, but like PHP has been a pretty big deal for quite some time, and I don't think anybody's going to correct me all that much if I claim that PHP has historically, at the very least, been probably the the standard web development. I'm not saying that it's good, because we have quite a lot of exploits and security. Like there's tons of people who hate PHP, but at the very least we can agree that it's pretty established in the web space, I hope. But if you ask me, well, Python has no claim whatsoever to being the future of web development, and that's not because of Python. It's I think that there is no language right now who has that claim, apart from one that we can make an argument for, and that would be JavaScript or TypeScript, whichever you prefer. Right? TypeScript probably a little bit more now, but let's just say JavaScript for the sake of simplicity, right? And the reason being because, and it's actually the reason why I recommend to people that when it comes to JavaScript development, it is probably going to be the easiest, I'm not saying easy, but it's probably the easiest way to get fairly wide reach as a software developer these days. The reason being because practically everything that requires a front end of any kind, which web almost always does, and in many cases back end you can do that as well. There's not that many people, I would say comparison wise, there are not that many companies who use, say, Node.js or Deno or like Bun or so forth, like for the back end, that there are companies are using some type of front-end application framework or something like that, and that's all JavaScript. So if we were to say, because you're talking full stack now, but if we were to just say web language, then JavaScript is the king. And I mean, it's the most popular programming language in the world, and I will argue that that has quite a lot to do with the fact that you can have a lot of backends, but you're always going to have JavaScript on the front end in some way or shape, right? Unless, of course, WebAssembly takes over everything, and then everything is I'm not saying Rust, but you know what I'm trying to say, right? But it's the same thing for full stack. For me, at the very least, I would go as far to argue, and I don't think, I mean, this is just a personal opinion, it doesn't really reflect the reality, but to me, JavaScript and TypeScript and so forth, like Node.js and Deno and like whichever runtime you are using, right? That is the new web language. That's the best web language you can have, because it used to be PHP, but these days I would say that you will get more from just using JavaScript for everything. But to be realistic about the thing, the reason why I'm saying that there is no language that can claim the future of web development as a full stack language is because, as I said, by default you cannot have a full stack setup with one language unless you're doing everything in JavaScript, or if you're making like static websites, which was the case for quite some time. The ergo why PHP was such an amazing, I mean, I personally still prefer to, I mean, I wish I could var dump like I did in PHP, because that is so nice. I'm just gonna say it, I love to be able to just var dump on any page I want and just see what's there and not have to run through a million debuggers and all that stuff. I love it. I absolutely love it. That may not be a convincing argument to use PHP, but it's at least one. However, since JavaScript is required, and depending on how far you want to stretch the term full stack, because JavaScript was a thing even before React and Vue and Angular and stuff like that. But today, the amount of knowledge you need and the tooling and the ecosystem around JavaScript and front-end development has grown to a point where that's why we basically have front-end developers today. It used to be the case that you had 90% of your application was done on the backend by backend developers, and then you did mostly like a rendered web page of some sort, and then you might have some JavaScript on the page to do some arbitrary small things, or you might have some jQuery or something like that. Today you're building like entire application, like much richer experiences with basically all JavaScript. And so to be a full stack developer today means a different thing, I would argue, or the requirements have gone up on you since the older days. In the older days, you could swing being quote unquote a full stack developer with like 90% of your knowledge being backend and then 10% JavaScript. But today, that ratio isn't really, I would say, it's not really accurate anymore. And so that brings us to, okay, so what would be a full stack web development language? Well, as I said, because there is no one, I argue, who's ever going to settle on one single backend language, because that's the real question. To me, the real question is which backend are you going to use? Because JavaScript is practically like set in stone at this point, in my opinion, at the very least. And then what are you going to use on the backend? And that differs. It differs so much that there is no way to say that there's definitely going to be one that wins it all. And I mean, if you look at the popularity contest about languages and stuff like that, you have everything from Python being like the world's most popular programming language type of things, to Java being probably one of, if not the most dominant backend language there is in the marketplace. Like if you think it's just amounts of jobs available and systems using it and stuff like that. And then you have things like C#, like Golang is pretty popular, like for backend development. It's a whole range, and because there's so many backend languages, you can't really say that there is one of them who's going to be the future of like web development or something like that. Because frankly speaking, people are so divided on which language they like and what things that they like. Because like that's the thing that is nice about the front end. Due to that the browser standardized on JavaScript as the primary language, the choice is easy, but we do not have the same sort of platforms in the backend. The ecosystem is much more diverse, and that is due to the fact that you don't really have someone who owns a platform similar to the browser where everybody needs to be, and therefore the choices are like the range of choices are wider. And that's why I don't think you will ever see something that can truly claim to be the future of web development in neither as just a backend language or as a full stack choice. Even though I would have loved it. I mean, my career would be amazing if everybody worked in, say, TypeScript across the whole stack, but that's simply not something that I believe to be realistic. So what I want you to take away from this is that I don't know who's telling you that Python is the future of web development. It certainly is not, if you ask me at the very least. Very, very few companies who are of scale are using Python as the primary programming language. The most common corporate languages and large-scale development and so forth are going to be JavaScript / TypeScript together with Java or C#. Hands down, no discussion whatsoever. If you look at the global scale, and you can go and check those numbers if you want to. If you look locally in specific regions, it differs absolutely, but there is, like, in terms of industry standards and so forth, nothing there like that is like as popular as that. Python is one of the most popular programming languages in the world, but not necessarily for web. That's the thing I want you to understand. That Python is amazing. I love the language. I worked with it during my school days and so forth. So like, there's nothing wrong with the language, but I would say that it's a bit of a stretch to say that it's the thing that is going to be like the new web development thing, because it's been around for quite some time, and we're still not standardizing on Python as an average for like web development and things like that. It is definitely one of the first choices for people who are working with data science or like things like that, machine learning or anything like that, or statistics and so forth and so forth. So it's not going anywhere, and I can just imagine it being as popular as it is for quite some time, because it is a really great language. But usually when companies like staff up backend developers and they're building larger scale systems and so forth, they're usually in the corner of either Oracle or Microsoft. Those are the most common trends you see, and luckily enough there's quite a few companies who try out different things and so forth and so forth. It's not so common to see that really large companies, like they as I said, are usually a little bit more conservative, which is understandable. But if you asked me personally, I would prefer it if everything on like the whole stack was like just JavaScript rock through, like through and through, because if you could get to a point where that would be the default, similar to how PHP was the default back in the day, it would be the best thing, I argue, due to the fact that, in my opinion at the very least, you can think about what you want about the JavaScript language and TypeScript and so forth, but in terms of learning materials, knowledge, like having one language across the whole stack and so forth and so forth, it would be a very solid choice for, like, I don't even know how many projects. It's very rare that I find that I have a practical reason for not using it across the whole stack as a full stack option. There are situations where you might need another language, and I've said so about Golang and Rust before. If you have specific needs, you might want to opt for something that is a little bit different and have different perks or benefits and consequences, right? But for the average web project, I see no reason to go with anything besides something like TypeScript. Have a great day.